and welcome back to On Air with Dr. Pete. I'm your host, Dr. Pete Economo, and today I am thrilled to welcome a very special guest to the show, MB Paradise. MB, welcome.
Thank you for having me. Hi, Dr. Pete.
Hey, so MB, we are so so we're going to talk about Jersey Shore and lots of other things because we are both on the Jersey Shore. But she is truly a Jill of all trades. She's worn many hats throughout her career. She's a former college professor. She's also worked as an athletic trainer and concussion spotter at both Monmouth and Princeton University. But her professional resume does not stop there. She is a busy mother of three, a passionate advocate for inclusion, and an accomplished author and speaker who encourages writers of all ages to pursue their craft. She's earned an undergraduate degree from Rutgers University. Go Scarlet Knights, because you know that.
You?
Yep, go RU. That's a part of it too. And a Master's of Education from the University of Virginia. So we'll definitely get into some sports backgrounds there. But she's got a full life of experience. But she's also felt these years of frustration by her career, spinning her wheels and struggling with the all too familiar feeling of not living up to her full potential. So today we're going to dive deep into that journey. And I know it'll inspire many of you who are listening because many of us have felt stuck. And I think MB is going to help us get unstuck. And she's proof of that. So we're going to jump right in. Thanks so much for being here today. And I want you, now you share for our audience a little bit about your education.
Sure. Yeah. So I went to Rutgers University, as you mentioned, and when I got there, Rutgers is a huge place.
Yeah.
And if you don't kind of find your place in a huge place, it could be a little daunting. And I knew, I walked onto the field hockey team. I made it.
Nice.
But after a week, I quickly realized that this is a lot of time, and there's no professional field hockey league after this. But I loved sports. I loved being around athletes. And I said, what's my next, move here? So I went to this, athletic training meeting at the Hale Center. For people that know Rutgers, I accidentally went to the Hill Center at first, which is a physics building. So by a twist of fate, I actually got to the right place, found my people, loved it, and dove into that head first. So, many hours at the Hale Center, at College Ave gym, but just learning so much beyond the classroom.
Yeah.
And plus you get to travel as a student athletic trainer.
Yeah.
They assigned us a team.
Yeah.
And I had everybody from the men's soccer team when they competed for the national championship.
Nice.
As a student now.
Yes.
But then I also had the experience of being with women's volleyball who were 0-22. And we drove, in a van to Pittsburgh, I think 4 times one semester, which is insane. But you know what? These were great times, and just hanging out with athletes, playing cards, you spend a lot of time just getting to know one another, and trying new foods and just a bunch of stuff, I feel like you're supposed to do in college. So I got really lucky there.
Yeah, there's nothing like that experience as a student athlete or just being around the world of athletics. And like you said, this the polarization of a national championship soccer team to an 0-22 volleyball team, that has much different feelings, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And it's so funny, like the competitive fire is always there.
Always.
I think, for one reason or another, this group of girls, although they didn't win, they stuck together. There was something about them. Like they just had they had fun despite the losses.
Yeah.
And they were a great group, and they taught me a lot in that, because it could have went one way or another, and they decided to take a positive spin.
I love it. So funny of field hockey. I get so confused watching field hockey. So for all my field hockey listeners, don't be mad at me. I sat with one of the assistant coaches, for a former one at Monmouth actually, and I was like, I need to watch a field hockey game with you so I can hear what the rules are. And I can't say how many times she was like, I'm not sure what that one was. And I was like, if you're saying that, because some of these penalties, it's so wild to.
Yeah.
So any of your children do sports? Because I know, I want to see how you balance sort of that with now being family with this demanding career. But I wonder if your children got into any of this.
It's, ironically, no. But my youngest one is the only one that plays sports. She actually does play field hockey. But my older two, no interest. My husband and I are just sport junkies. We'll watch any game. We'll cheer any team on. I mean, during the pandemic, I was watching rodeo. I mean, I'm actually pathetic. Like I'm a self-proclaimed sports geek. But I don't know. There's something about it. It was a way for me as a child to connect with my dad.
Yeah.
He had 2 girls. and it was something that always brought us together, especially in those awkward teenage years when you had nothing to talk about. There was always the Yankees. There was
Oh my,
always the moves and off season. There was always the giant football team. So
yeah.
it's just kind of in my DNA.
So Yankees and the Giants, those are your teams?
Yes, they are.
I won't hold that against you. We're a Mets family, but the Yankees had a good run this year.
They did, and
Yeah,
the Mets are fun to watch, though. I mean, like I
yeah,
am not a Boston fan, but I'm a quasi Met fan. I don't know what makes me a bad person, but I love watching them play. They're gritty.
yeah. They are gritty. Well, and that's what we talk about in New Jersey. So how do you balance? I guess I'm certain that you have got grit. Looking at your story, and so I know that. And so how do you balance family life, with career now in today's world?
In today's world, it's difficult. I think the key thing for me is just having a support system, having that scaffolding around you, a supportive, spouse or partner in life is huge.
Yeah,
That person that will pick up your slack when you can't make something happen. And also some understanding kids,
yeah.
like sometimes you're not always going to be at every single thing.
Hmm.
And that's just part of it.
Hmm.
And, you know, plus as when they were small, I did get very lucky. My sister was able to watch them one day a week, so
Oh,
I didn't have to
nice.
put them in childcare.
Yeah,
And my parents did, on Wednesdays while I taught at Rutgers.
yeah.
So it was a juggling act for sure, and my car was constantly getting packed and unpacked. But
Uh,
yeah, we figured it out.
the bags, like just packing and unpacking the car is wild. So when did you first feel frustrated with your career trajectory? Having done so many different things.
Yeah. So when I was a young professional, and I was convinced, I was going to do something big.
Yeah,
Dr. Pete. I was like, I'm gonna do something big in this world.
yeah,
And I told my sister one time, like, when I was 10, I told her I'm gonna be in the Olympics. That
yeah.
didn't happen. And then I said, all right, I'm gonna be like the best athletic trainer that there is. And I got my first pair of scissors and I told her, this is gonna be famous one day. And she's like, whatever, whatever.
Yeah.
So in 1999, I was 29, my mom got diagnosed with cancer, and it was one of
Hmm.
those kinds that you can't cure.
Mm.
So I had to make a choice. At that
Hmm.
point, I did not have children, but and I was still working full time, and
Hmm.
I was kind of like on this cool little path, meeting people, networking, doing my job. I
Hmm.
think doing it pretty okay. And then suddenly it was like, okay, my mom needs me,
Yeah.
so I had to make a shift, and I decided to do that. And shortly thereafter, I had children as well. So now I
Hmm.
have three young kids and a sick parent. And
Mm.
now I am, I'm like, okay, I have to quit my full time gig. And I got three part time jobs that I could piece together.
Wow.
And I was doing that. And I thought, okay, this is going to be 6 months to a year, and now I'm be done with this.
Yeah.
And then that turned into 18 years.
Mm.
18 years
18 years
of
of doing the three part-time jobs, pulling this all together, and well, also caring for mom.
yes. Yeah. So
Wow.
it was really, there are times, and now I would do that all again because to me I prioritized what was most important to me.
Yes.
And my mom was easy to take care of. She was a fighter. She was
Yeah.
a positive force. She wanted to live. She had an indomitable will. It
Yeah.
was like she taught me so much during that time frame.
Yeah.
But I'd be lying if I didn't say that there are moments within that stretch
Mm.
where it didn't bubble up. Like, I can't believe I am counting pharmaceutical products,
Yeah.
on a Tuesday in a, you know, on a storage unit in the dark in somebody's basement. Like, suddenly
Wow.
I was doing something that you really didn't need much education for.
Yeah.
Still held on to my two classes at Rutgers, which were like I was just clinging on to that
Yeah.
because that was really kind of made me feel like, all right, like I still got a little juice.
Yeah.
Still connecting with students, but
Yeah.
yeah, that's when I first started feeling frustrated.
And then you talk very openly about therapy, and so was that the moment? Like, at what moment were you like, oh, let me do this therapy thing, or because therapy, certainly from my perspective, I always say. I've done a lot of work to destigmatize therapy, especially in the world of athletics, and now today, because of the world we live in and because of social media and how much accessible all this is, I'm trying to kick people out the office now. Like, now they want to come to therapy, and I'm like, okay, look, not everyone needs therapy, and we can do therapy short term. And so, what was it like for you? Because I know it's not always that accepted. And so, how did you make that decision?
No, absolutely. Especially coming, the generation before us, I feel like
Yeah,
had very little resources. I feel like
totally.
my dad could have 100%, he was misunderstood. He was a great, great person, but he was depressed.
Yeah,
And
totally.
I wish he had those resources to tap into. I feel fortunate that our generation does
Yeah,
realize that they're out there,
yeah.
but still, sometimes it's hard to make the call.
Oh,
And
yeah,
I was frustrated for a while,
yeah,
but I felt like a broken record. And
yeah.
I felt like, my husband is super understanding and very, very open to listening. But I was feeling bad for him because I was just reiterating the same story. Like, I can't believe this is what I'm doing. Like, professionally, this is not what I had in mind, blah, blah, blah. And one point, I was just like, that's it. I can't stand it anymore. I'm going to call. I got really fortunate. I had heard of this woman that was
Hmm.
good, and I called her, and she called me back, and she had an opening,
Yeah.
and so yeah,
I love,
worked
yeah.
out.
I mean, the fact, for listeners, when you say MB, when you say like she called me back, that mean, they might be like, well, what are you talking? A lot of times you call, a lot of therapists work alone, and so you might make a phone call and then not get a phone call back, and it's a dead end. And then, like you said, it's so hard to make that phone call. And so, like for my practice, I make sure that everyone gets a phone call back,
Oh,
and
that's
at
awesome.
least
Yeah,
gets
that's big.
some.
It's big.
It's huge. It's huge because again, we're all suffering. And so you've also talked about, the impact of a former Rutgers athlete that I know well and in my roles now. But I wanted to hear about how your encounter with Eric LeGrand and sort of how that really pivoted you.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as an athletic trainer, the day that Eric got hurt, I was familiar with Eric because I follow Rutgers athletics,
Yeah,
and I'm a grad and I'm in that kind of realm and world, and I follow a lot of different stuff. But
yeah,
I had heard of Eric, but when Eric got injured, I remember this. This is really kind of weird. It's one of those moments where my kids were sitting there like eating something at the counter, and I was sweeping the kitchen floor, and we had because I'm a sports geek, like I
yeah,
said, I had the game on the radio.
yeah.
And I was listening, and then suddenly it was dead silence. And then the announcers are
Mm,
saying that a player has been injured. And any player, I just would have stopped and just a moment, just like hoped for the best for that person, and like
yeah,
I said, a
yeah.
prayer for that person. I didn't really know Eric at that point. But, any devastating injury like that is like, oh, God, just hits to my core. So heard that. And then,
Especially sorry, but especially because if
no,
listeners don't know, athletic trainers, I'm always like team athletic trainer. You all are the ones that are like, you guys are in it, and so the athletic trainers are the first one out there for that injury. So I'm assuming like the compassion you have was just you probably also felt it for everyone, like the team, the other the trainers that are there with him, and
yes, yes,
yeah,
absolutely. And knowing the staff, knowing the athletic
right,
trainers that were on staff, and knowing other stories of, you practice that. You practice
yeah,
spinal cord injury,
hmm,
those catastrophic injuries all the time. And so
yeah,
just knowing what they were, maybe having an idea of what they were going through in that moment, you're like, oh, baby, this is big.
yeah,
Um, and, also, Dr. P, just knowing, being in the training room day-to-day basis, athletes' identity is so closely tied to their sport.
totally,
So even if they, have a knee injury that's going to keep them out 3, 4 weeks,
hmm,
psychologically, for these kids, it's really, really difficult. So
yeah,
then when you have something that's not only season ending, but career ending and life threatening, you
yeah,
just pile on these layers of catastrophe here.
hmm,
That's to see someone come back from something like that, like Eric LeGrand
yeah,
and other people.
yeah.
um, I'm drawn to those stories. I'm drawn to that. What drives them? Like, how did they do it? I think that's really unbelievable persistence, and I really gravitate towards people with that sort of energy.
So he was the inspiration. Eric was your inspiration behind this child book that you wrote, right? Like Beach Santa.
Well, what happened was the inspiration for the particular story came when my kids were small. They were looking for shells at the beach.
Hmm.
I'm down there. They were just goofing around. They couldn't find any good ones. There was a fisherman next to us
Hmm.
that overheard them carrying on and threw down three perfect shells onto the
Hmm.
sand. And they ran over and they grabbed them. And they weren't Jersey shells. You know what I mean? You could tell
Yeah.
the difference between a San Marco shell and a Jersey shell. These were like Florida, shiny, pristine.
Yeah.
Anyhow, he throws these shells down. My kids grab them, and my middle daughter says, "Mom, that guy gave us these shells. He's kind of like a beach Santa." And I looked over
Uh,
at him, and no lie, he gave me that kind of like little nod, like, I got you.
yeah.
And that was that. That night, went home, put him to sleep, and I was like, that was like a random act of kindness. That was really cool what
Yeah.
that guy did. So I wrote down the details on some note cards, stuck them in my drawer, and then they sat there for 10 years. So
Wow.
I see Eric, come out of this thing, and I saw him speak a couple times after his injury, and I'm like, this guy's unbelievable. And then I ended up working in the booth next to Eric at Rutgers because as a concussion spotter, see him and his mom Karen, on a weekly basis during the season, or whenever there's games, and develop this little friendship of sorts. And I was like, always like checking in with them. And so during the pandemic,
Yeah.
I see now I'm at a low with my career. I don't know what I'm going to do.
Hmm.
I honestly am at this point unemployed because I thought I had a job lined up, didn't work out. Anyhow, I see Eric taking steps to open a coffee shop
Yeah.
online.
Yeah.
And it was one of those moments, I think, there's those moments that just hit you in life.
Yeah.
This just came in and just hit me hard. Like, look at this kid. Look at what he's doing.
Yeah.
He can't move from the neck down. And he's opening a business during a pandemic. And like, I was like, that is it. Like,
Yeah.
that is it. No more excuses. I'm going to finish one of my ideas. I have a bunch of like
Yeah.
invention book ideas. And when I do, I'm going to donate back to Team LeGrand.
Which is
So
amazing
that's what
because
I'm doing.
and you do that, right? 25% of all.
Yes.
I
Of all book purchases go back to Team LeGrand. Yeah, I've given them 2 checks so far. Hopefully this year,
That's
we'll have a
amazing.
bigger one. Each year gets a little bigger.
Yeah. So, from your perspective, how do you feel Team LeGrand's making an impact? Like, so the story inspired you, but then what is it like beyond that, for you is, why to give back then? Why to give to Team LeGrand?
The Give to Team LeGrand is kind of like a multi-pronged thing. I did this for myself for a couple reasons. Number one, Dr. P, I did not want to give up.
Yeah.
I felt like this could be hard, like this project could be hard, selling it could be hard, getting it over the finish line could be hard. If I tied it to somebody else and I didn't want to disappoint somebody else, I felt like that would keep me going.
Yeah.
And it did, because there were moments where I did want to quit. And I was like, I can't quit. I promised Eric I was going to do this, and I was promised Team LeGrand I was going to donate.
Hmm.
That's one thing. Another thing is, when I was a child, my cousin, I had one cousin that lived in Texas.
Hmm.
She was born with spina bifida, so she was in a
Mm.
wheelchair. And so when I was younger and, we visited her, like I'm skipping and hopping and doing cartwheels, and she wasn't, and
Yeah.
I always felt so bad about that. I never knew how to help her.
Yeah.
When this book idea came about, I said, this is my little payback, my way to give back, and show, her that I actually do care about kids in wheelchairs and how they're
Yeah.
perceived and all that. Yeah. So it's turned into more than just a little story, because
Yeah.
as I was writing, I felt a little weird putting my kids in the story.
Hmm.
So I had a spark of inspiration. I texted Eric and I said, hey, like I'm writing the book and it's going okay, but can I use you as a character? Would it be okay if I put you in, as a child, as a character in a wheelchair?
Yeah.
And Eric being Eric was like, sure, MB, like, yeah. So I said, can you send me a picture of yourself when you were 8 years old? So
Wow.
emails me a picture of him when he's 8, and I gave that to my illustrator, and that's what we based one of the characters off of.
That's
So, in the story, it's just a fun story about what Santa does on his day off.
yeah.
And I intentionally do not talk about the wheelchair because I feel
Yeah.
as if, no kid wants to be defined by that. They don't want to be
Yeah.
defined by their disability or their disease or whatever. So I wanted to include that, but not talk about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because then it's there. So did you ever think that like this idea, right? This idea you had from this moment. I'm assuming was it cold? Was it one of those like December days of finding these
It was
three
cool.
shells?
Yeah.
Yeah, figured. I guess that makes sense. But did you ever think that would lead to like now becoming this like inclusion activist?
I had no idea.
Yeah.
I had no idea. And the weird thing was when I went into therapy, I was so focused. I thought my spot was in the collegiate setting as a teacher,
Yeah.
as a maybe a college advisor.
Yeah.
I felt the energy of the college campus. I was just limiting myself so much.
Yeah.
And I felt like the therapist just helped me to widen that view. It sounds so stupid and simple, but I didn't think I could be more than one thing. I
Yeah.
thought, hey, I went to school for athletic training. I put all this time and effort in. I paid for my education. I felt this obligation to myself to just keep doing that
Yeah.
and not deviating. And I was shortchanging myself a bit, which I came to find out.
Yeah. Well, and so I mean, maybe say more about therapy because I get one of the things that if whatever you're comfortable with because I think
Yeah.
there's probably a listener who's like maybe like you talked about that call like afraid to make the call And there's,
Absolutely. Yeah.
and so I don't know, like what really stuck out to you from therapy? I mean, I get what you're saying when you're saying like it just opened my eyes. I mean, that's a lot of what I do which I'm blessed to do, with people I work with. But from your perspective, what would you share with the listener about that?
Yeah, I would share, first of all, I think maybe the hardest thing was making the call.
Yeah,
Like the hardest thing, like admitting to yourself, like I can't get out of this rut on my own.
yeah,
Like I thought, all right, I'm resourceful. I have plenty of colleagues. I have plenty of people in my network. I have a loving family. What's wrong with me?
yeah,
Like, why can't I do this? Why can't I figure this out?
yeah,
But I was spinning like on a
yeah,
wheel and it just not getting anywhere.
yeah,
So making the call was huge, and then getting into it, it's so funny. Like I felt like, all right, cool. Like I'll go and I'll do this for maybe six times, and maybe they can just fix me and I'm gone.
yeah,
Like I'll tell you, here's my stuff, and now if you could just fix it and like I'll implement it and let's get on with things.
yeah, yeah,
But I really learned to have some patience with it all,
yeah.
and to I honestly felt like self-compassion was a bunch of bullshit. I hate to like say it, but I
No,
was like,
totally.
okay, you're just feeling sorry for yourself. Like,
Yeah,
what
yeah,
is
yeah,
this self-compassion stuff?
yeah,
Like, isn't that just admitting that you're needy?
right. Yeah,
Like to me, it was so against the grain.
yeah, yeah,
But
yeah,
then, like, she introduced to me, like, this is scientifically proven research that just says, like, we're all human and we all struggle. And there's kind of like this, you're not alone in this.
yeah.
And just pounding that, took me a while because I'm pretty thick-headed, I guess, but it took me a little bit. But she got through to me, and
Well,
I unstuck myself, and I saw myself doing more than one thing. And it's opened up
yeah.
incredible things for me, like things I never ever could have expected or predicted.
Well, there's definitely other thick-headed people listening, and so they'll appreciate that. And a lot of athletes, a lot of people in this world of athletics are thick-headed because we think we know what we need to do. And so I heard you say like you thought you had the thought of who you should be, and then therapy helped you sort of unravel that. So this way you
Yeah, so
weren't
she helped me
limiting
drop the
yourself.
word should. Yeah, she helped
Yeah,
me drop the word should, and that was a big thing too. Like, shouldn't I be like I'm
yeah,
50? Shouldn't I be here? Shouldn't I be
yeah,
doing this? Shouldn't I have a pension? Shouldn't I have a steady paycheck? And
yeah,
and plus, like I felt there was a one time that it's so funny. I really kind of got mad, like the only time, because she's like, "You're rigid," and I'm like, "Wait, what?
yeah,
What?" Because
yeah. You push back.
as an athletic trainer, you're anything but rigid. You're flexible.
Yeah,
Coaches change practices. You change with it.
yeah,
Even in your family life, your kid can't go to Thanksgiving. They're sick. You stay home. You're
yeah,
flexible. The rest of the family goes.
yeah,
And so I felt like, what do you mean? What do you mean inflexible? But
yeah.
she was saying on the way I was perceiving myself, not others,
That's right.
but I was perceiving myself. I was just
Yeah.
limiting myself on this rigid little point. Like this is it. Like this is it for me. And if it's not that, forget it.
Most
So
of us.
I really was able to open up my, eyes.
Sounds like a great therapist. I mean, most of us are rigid, so really trying to create that flexibility is what key. And Albert Ellis was one who said you should all over yourself, which is the should statements, because the should statements are really, they affect us negatively. So, MB, your story is really inspirational. I'm so thankful you're here. And what would be, a piece of advice you might share to like nudge, that person who's maybe not who they think they should be? What would you say to them about like that little piece of advice to nudge them over the line?
I would say forget about the fear. Fear is real, and like I feel, I also kind of guilty for being a little bit fearful because, my parents are like, oh, if you have faith, like you shouldn't have fear. And it's like, I'm freaking afraid. Like, I'm sorry, I'm going to say it out loud. I'm afraid of certain things. Like, I'm afraid of not providing for myself, but just taking that bet on yourself.
Yeah,
Like I took a bet on myself. I was like, all right, you know what? I'm going to gamble on myself for once. I'm going to do the work that I need to
nice.
do
Yeah,
to unstick myself. And it's really, I don't have everything figured out being
who
far
does?
from it. Who does?
Who
But
does?
I'm in a way better place. I give myself a lot more grace. I'm not as hard on myself.
Yeah,
And I feel like, I'm a better person for going.
I love that, and I wonder. I mean, this is like a kind of a little bit of a deeper question, but any regrets? Anything? I love owning that you're not exactly where you need to be yet, but any regrets that you see in this moment in your life?
Right now, I'm really just going after things and not I read this book, Big Magic. My therapist
Yeah,
said, "Hey,
yeah,
I think you should read this book, Big Magic, by Elizabeth Gilbert, I think it is." And
yeah,
it's kind of like, and speaking about being creative and throwing a creative work out into the world, like a book,
yeah,
like, anything, a piece of art, a piece of work, and it doesn't really matter what everybody else thinks.
yeah,
It's hard to get to that spot, especially when you've worked for hours and hours and hours on
yeah,
something you think it's good. And
yeah,
then you're about to press send. Like, this is the moment. Like, this is the time that it hits, Amazon. It's available for purchase. That's like, holy crap. Like, oh my God. Like, other people are going to see this. Like, what are they going to? It doesn't matter what they think. Like, if you're
yeah.
proud of it, that's good enough.
Yeah. No, I think that yeah, Big Magic. It's that is you're right, Gilbert, and it's a great sort of tool. And there's lots of tools out there. And that's what we hope to do. On Air with Dr. P, kind of like give all these different tools out there. So, MB, I appreciate your time, and I wish you continued success with Beach Santa, and of course with the LeGrand Fund. So hopefully I'll see you at one of the games, or you have to let me know. But
Sounds good. That sounds good. Yes. Thank you so much. Thanks for
yeah.
having me.
And where can people find you? So I know we have mbparadise.com.
Yeah, my book is on my website and I do author visits. I could speak to groups and yeah, I'm here for it. Anybody that's kind of stuck or, you know, in that, you know, in that space where they're trying to re-enter the workforce, maybe you've been out of it for a while. I'm here to steer you and cheer you. I don't know everything, but I'll steer you and I'll cheer you on best I can.
Well, take a look, everybody. Like, follow, and share. This is, like I said, the last episode I talked about 5 healthy tips for people, and in the first podcast, On Air with Dr. Pete is really meant to be a safe space where you get some support and guidance. And I hope that hearing from guests such as MB Paradise, you find yourselves empowered to make some of these small changes and recognize that frustration can help to empower us. If you want to share or hear from us, everything's on officialdrpete.com. Tune in next week as we get ready to rest and recharge because, the holidays are upon us. And so all of us need to deal with the anxiety and depression of all the worry that comes up with these holidays. So thank you for tuning in today. If you love this episode, please head to our social channels and please like, follow, and share our podcasts. So until then, spread a little kindness and stay well.